So hi, welcome to Mystic Suktas. I am your host, Sandeep Suryavanshi, and I am the CEO of Aid Expert Advisory. In this podcast, we bring you some very interesting case studies and stories about technology-led business transformations. We talk to experts who have managed large transformation projects, and we talk to companies who have made big bets and who have successfully innovated in their business models using digital technologies. Hope that we have some great fun conversations and lots of learning from our guests. And our guest today is Chris Jackson. Chris is actually a cloud evangelist and data strategist with Teradata. And as a consultant for Teradata, Chris has developed data and AI strategy for some of the largest firms in Asia Pacific. Chris is also an enthusiastic contributor to the startup community and loves to help them with their data strategies. When I talk to Chris, it's always fun stories about the most challenging assignments, and he brings in lots of good stories and good learning. So Chris, welcome to Mystic Suktas. It's really a pleasure having you here.
It's great to be here, Sandeep. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, I'll just dive into the questions and really see what insights you would be able to share with us and our audience. So most companies today realize that data is the new oil. I think that's nothing new anymore. Everybody realizes that. But then very few are successful in, understanding how to mine for that oil successfully. In your experience as a consultant, where should companies look first? And how should they find opportunities to monetize their data? And where does the maximum business value lie? Would you talk about that, please?
Sure. Well, I think, since Clive Cumbie, originally created that phrase, right? Data is the new oil. People forget about the context that it was created in. The very next thing he said after that was, you have to use some refining techniques, right, to actually turn that oil into things that are valuable. And I think that's very much true, right? We do recognize data is the new oil. It is potentially the game changer for most organizations. So we see that now with the digital strategies and the transformations that organizations are going through, right? COVID accelerated that whole set of transformations. The cloud is accelerating those transformations. But when you go to actually try to create value, you have to think about data products, right? These are the things that we build with that oil, right? It's the stuff that we turn and refine it into. And then they can be heavily refined or lightly refined. They can be merged with other products to create all of those downstream things, right? That, it's just like, where you get to plastics and you get to lubricants and all the other things that are very, very useful, right? Now, our challenge is to create those and disseminate those and monetize those in our organizations, and to do it without creating a lot of frictions or a lot of silos. In fact, we break down those silos, and I think that's worth talking about as well. But for me, what we always talk about, on sort of this kind of mode is really, if you start with these products, whether it's raw data or master data or even some output of a prior process, that refining step, the next thing that you get to is making it what we call fit for purpose, right? So when you design for data scenarios, we set a level of expectation. It could be around data quality, it could be around what we're going to use it for, the kinds of metrics we're going to create, or the KPIs. But it's usually done in the context of a project or a data pipeline. When we design data for reuse and we design products that are much more foundational, we can go a much broader step. But we also need to take this perspective that it will be reused. And if we design these single purpose products, the next time I need to do something that's very similar, I either have to go through that whole process again, right? And we lose that notion. So we're very much, at least when we start to look at organizations and how they synthesize these data products together, how do they use this to actually get an ROI out of the process? And while an individual project might give you a discrete ROI, the bulk of the ROI really comes from doing things we've never been able to do before, taking data from one part of the organization and another part and combining it together, taking data from our internal systems, merging it with external systems that partners run,
Right.
with third-party data coming from a marketplace. All of those are the spaces that are not easy to do.
Right.
And if you have to do it every time you want to make a new product, you get a problem. So we encourage people to design for reuse, right? And I think that's an important concept.
Excellent. So now all of this is pretty much a lot of things to be done, but then, you got to have easier steps to get into it, start. So what do you think are the first few things that an organization really should start looking at when they want to design, so they create a data strategy? So what would be the first few things?
So, data strategies are very, very interesting because they need to lead you to the outcome. And most people are looking for quick wins, right? And strategic doesn't say quick win. Tactical says quick win, right? And so the question is, how do you bridge from a tactical, I must do this, to a strategic, I will be eventually able to do all these other things? And in my mind, it's about igniting capabilities.
Right.
So when I create a platform and I begin to light up capabilities of that platform, or I enable the people in my organization and I build their skills, as I build those skills, yes, they lead me to a tactical use case. I can deliver what I need to deliver, right? I can show the low-hanging fruit. I can pick those things, but I'm also getting ready and moving us down the organization, down the maturity curves, right? And you'll see a continuum, and you can measure your organization across these continuums. You can say, how siloed is my data to how integrated and reusable my data is. I can say, how fast does my data move through my organization? Is it accessible, right? Do I have real-time data sources? How well am I integrated with all of my partners and the other folks in my supply chain or whatever else it might be? Right. Those are the connection points. And some organizations are further along those continuums than others are. Some have built the right kind of tooling. Some of that's operational tooling. Some of it's is actually built around how you design things, right? Security retrofits are very expensive, but security by design is only a small incremental, right? So when we make these trade-offs and we decide what we want to be when we grow up or reach the next phase of our evolution, then the real key here is, which continuum am I focusing on? I cannot move the whole organization on every one of those continuums.
Right.
So I need to pick a continuum to focus on and then put a significant amount of the effort. Focus will breed success. And so when we look at organizations with a data strategy and someone says, I want to focus on governance, we have to say, well, what's the outcome of the governance? Why are you doing this? Well, I have to meet regulatory requirements. That's a different kind of a focus than I just want to invest in metadata, or I just want to put out, data stewards as a new role in my organization. It should lead you to something that's downstream. And so for me, that's where I think the keys on data strategy is to look and say, I have a vision, I have a perspective, I have a point of view, and I have a series of sequences that I'm going to do to move all of these continuums a little bit, and one of them I'm going to make a big leap forward on. And I might do that once or twice on the same continuum, but I'm likely to shift my focus in another year, 18 months, whatever it might be, right? After I've made that big leap, now I can work on another part of the organization or another part of the organization's capability statement, right? So when we look at organizations, really is capabilities. That gets harder in a distributed world and in a world of data meshes and other things where I'm pushing down that control and I'm more localizing it inside of the organization. So the structure and the goals of this organization and that pendulum from centralized to decentralized that swings back and forth, right, every 10 to 20 years, right? We have to consider those pressures as well.
Yes, absolutely great. So in all of this, I mean, when you're trying to figure out what exactly is the kind of business outcome we are going to focus on, we need to also obviously choose the right tool sets. I mean, the point is, if you choose the wrong tool set, you may, after a while, figure out that, okay, this is not going to get me where I want to go. Governance, yes, but it's not integrating everything. I'm not able to integrate equally quickly data coming from outside, or some such restrictions might happen. So from selecting tool sets, what do you think should a CIO or maybe a CEO think about?
That's really an interesting question, because there is no single right answer for this one.
Yeah.
Right? Part of it has to depend on the capabilities of your people and their ability to do that. Sometimes it's based on what they've already learned and what they know, and what is going to actually be effective in your organization. So there is no single silver bullet that says, oh, you do this, so this will solve your problem.
Yeah.
On the other side, there are things that you can do, particularly as a CIO and that kind of perspective, to set the framework and to say there is a strategy here that will allow us to get to where we're going to be. And we see this in analytics and decision making, right? There's a lot of organizations that say, I want to be data centric. I want to use contextual decision making. I want to be able to apply these processes.
Yeah.
And then I ask them, well, have you built out the tooling that's going to support this? Have you built out the enablement of your people side that's going to actually be able to support this? And often they said, I haven't thought about that yet. Or I was hoping, I'm going to depend on a consultant to come in and tell me what that might be. Obviously, as Teradata and representing an OEM, I frequently will go in and, we have our perspective and a guide pathway. But there are many, many right ways to do these things, right? And it used to be, 20, 30 years ago, projects might fail because of the technology you picked.
Okay.
Now they rarely fail because of technology. Some are easier to do or more expensive based on the technology choices you make. But they rarely fail because of that. They fail because of expectation management, of the ability of the organization to adopt them. Change management becomes really critical. These are the things that cause programs to never reach that. So either a lack of vision or too much vision, right? You see the whole spectrum there. But for when I advise technology leaders on what they need to pick, we usually talk about sort of a sequence of phases of growth in the organization. And your objective to become a decision-making organization says, I first have to have a way to have an insight, and then I need to be able to automate some of that decision-making. What I really want is the organization to be really good at exception management.
Okay.
The standard things that you do every day, I should be programming those into my systems and having those done. And we see this at Teradata with our mature customers. Some of our large banking customers and others have built hundreds of downstream applications that take data from an enterprise integrated kind of a view and can now begin to make decisions, and those feedback a loop. We used to call this active data warehousing, right? There's a lot of other names. Now it's moved to a much more sort of real-time kind of context, right? But all of those solutions, no matter what they are, they're taking and saying, I'm becoming aware of something, and now I am taking action on it. And this is the same problem we see with data science, right? The data scientists are really, really good at coming up with an insight, and they can write a wonderful academic paper or a white paper on the solution. But how many of those solutions actually make it into production? And if you know the lifetime of a model in production is on average about 6 months, then you say from there, who's going to maintain it? And if I promote the guy that built the model, right, and he's off doing the next thing for me because he's just wonderful and did a great job, or she did such a perfect example, then you start to say, wow, right, how am I ever going to do this as an organization, especially if I do every project with a new technology? And so there's some points where we have to, as CIOs, come in and put some ground rules in place. And sometimes that means picking technologies that are right for our organization and one of 50 right choices, right? And they're ones that make sense for us, and then they're ones that we can support. They can scale, they can handle this stuff, and they allow us to centralize what should be centralized and to decentralize the things that we don't need to, and to make intelligent choices about that. And I think that's a lot of us. So we look at building platforms and we look at enabling capabilities of those platforms as the primary focus of that kind of a context.
Right. Okay, great. So, so can you share some of the really stellar stories where, exceptional business results were delivered because there was a great data strategy and all the other aspects that you mentioned, that it was a right fit for the organization, right kind of skill sets were available within the organization to deliver that, and change management was good. So examples for our audience are really where they start, gaining those insights, internalizing those.
I had to kind of laugh at what you just said, right? What you just talked about is the perfect five-star solution. And rarely are they so clean, particularly when you're doing things at the enterprise level.
Yeah.
And at the enterprise level, first of all, there's a level of complexity, and there's a level of expectations that is often quite high, and an investment that is substantial and often multi-year.
Yeah.
Right? It's very difficult to do big things in a very, very short amount of time.
Right.
And have them stand the test of time, to still be operating 10 or 20 years later.
Yeah.
And if you've done things right, what you'll see is the organizations naturally forget the ROI they received, right? And I'll give you an example. One of the global banks that I've worked with, we used technology. We built what's called a super ledger. And a super ledger allows you to combine all kinds of different ERP accounting systems together, and to be able to add dimensions to it. So you might have 20 or 30 different dimensions that you can drill to, and ideally be able to drill all the way from your general ledger data to operational data, or to roll up your operational data to your general ledger. But we know general ledgers, we have adjustments, there's all kinds of processes that happen, and rarely will those two systems tie out.
Yeah.
So there's a layer in between of reconciliations. And we've been through this a number of times with a number of organizations. But what's interesting is if you can resolve that, first of all, you can do a couple of things that are unique. One is that you can give finance and risk the same base data.
Oh, yeah.
And they rarely agree. When you get to the board level, risk will say, what's this number, on a metric by number of employees, and finance will have a different number. And it's not that they're wrong.
Yeah.
It's that they've
looking
used
at
different rules,
dimension.
they've used different calculations, different filters. They've taken the data from maybe slightly different sources or at different times. And so the criteria that they've used is slightly different, but they call it the same thing. And a simple example might be, revenue by headcount. And you look at headcount and you say, well, does that include my full-time people or my part-time people? Right? Does it include contractors or not? Right? And one group might define it one way, and one might define it a different way. And that could be influenced by an external regulator who says, no, you must use this formula. And so we work a lot on the governance side there to try and make sure that we can actually resolve this. But if you get these things right, you can make a huge difference in how organizations handle even simple processes like closing their books every month.
Yeah.
Right. And at one of the global banks, we were able to take more than 5 days out of the closing cycle.
Oh, wow.
When you spread that across, dozens of countries and thousands of accountants that are involved in that close cycle, you might be saving, right, as much as 50,000 person days a month on a recurring process forever.
Yeah.
That's a gigantic number. But after a while, the organization now doesn't remember that improvement because they don't remember the old situation.
Yeah.
Right. And so you created that value, right? Your analytic systems are able to do these things, but we struggle to get people to actually recognize and call that value out. But it absolutely is possible. And it's more than likely that you answered not just the closing cycle, but that same Superledger or whatever we happen to build was able to answer many other questions as well, because these become fundamental to the way we run our businesses.
And decisions are much faster. I think it's always the case. What's the single source of truth is a common problem that everybody has. And if you're able to get to that point that, okay, this is the, hello, can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
able,
Yeah, you're fine.
okay, all right.
A little glitch there, right? It's fine.
Yeah. So I think that single source of truth is always elusive. And if you're able to get to that to a large extent, then yeah, decisions can be much faster. People don't have the underlying data to doubt, but maybe a perspective or a decision to be discussed rather than the data. So that's great.
Right. Yeah, data quality is always one of those spaces where it requires an investment to get to it, and too much is pretty easy to do, and not enough is always an issue, right? And so where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? Where do you do things? And a lot of what we spend time on is working with customers to understand whether the data is of sufficient quality to make the kinds of decisions. That goes back to that fit for purpose kind of rolling. If I create a new purpose, I may require a change in the level of curation of the data. And if I've done that on a per pipeline or a per processing kind of role, I have often black boxes inside my code. Well, how many copies of this data do I have? I have no idea, because I've used that same data in 10 or 20 or 30 or 100 or 1,000 different processes. And many of our clients that are complex clients are running 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 jobs, just collecting and collating and integrating their data on a daily basis. Just huge volume when you start dealing with thousands of sources and across, potentially 100 countries or something like that, right? That you see these global organizations struggle with. And that, of course, now you get into time zones and all the other availability. So data becomes available all the time. And so we need to move our thinking from batch to real time, and to be much more about being able to find that logical consistency between them. And I think that's fun for us right now, is we're still seeing that while organizations are enticed by the AI, by the analytics, all this new great things we can do with looking at behaviors and pulling that out of the data, right, to segment things in new ways, right? That's really interesting. But if the quality of the data or my operational, if I can't even report on it, and I still have HR and finance and risk all saying, wait, no, that same metric has 3 different definitions. I have no basis to do the advanced things, right? And so we see a lot of organizations who can't do the basic stuff, trying to do the complex things and struggling with that because they just haven't taken the time to get their house in order, to get foundational things together. The biggest one I see, I think probably the most often, is golden customer, right? They have many different copies of the customer. Is the customer out of my sales system the right one? Is the accounting ones the correct one? Is it, some applications, right? Maybe there's a mobile app. Where's my customers, right? And that gets to be even more complicated when you start to say, oh, well, my customers are maybe also my employees in a gig economy or others, right? We see some really complex
really
things.
Gets complex, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but if you get it right, you have a tremendous amount of opportunity to be able to do things that your competitors can't, and that leads to all kinds of really interesting outcomes, right? Because when you start to move the top line kind of revenues, or you can improve the profitability or even calculate accurately the profitability, pretty easy to trace the revenue side of the profit. It's not easy to trace the expense side, because so much of it is often indirect, and that requires allocations. It requires different ways of working than we traditionally have worked.
So Chris, I think what you described as examples and case studies here also highlight another fact, that this is all so much about people and culture. I mean, do people understand the value? Yes, at a 30,000 feet level, yes, value of data is understood. But then what are the challenges in using that data to deliver? So like you mentioned, whether it's a good quality data, is it a fit for purpose? And also there's a lot of business sense that needs to be driving that. I mean, if I am the sense is wrong on some summarized figure, it may be perfectly fine for me to, use that to decide on certain aspects, but not necessarily when I'm consolidating across so many geographies and all that. And it's a financial reporting thing. You cannot be, 1% or 2% wrong ultimately as well.
Right. Yeah, we see that in marketing, right?
Well,
Marketing is often good enough. It's okay
yeah,
because it's fuzzy anyway,
yes,
right? It's not something that requires an exactness.
yeah,
Financial reporting requires exactness,
absolutely.
especially when the regulators are involved. I think a good example to maybe talk through is smart cities,
Right.
because smart cities see all of the challenges of an organization and then some, because each one of the services they deliver, whether it's traffic management or the utilities or power management or waste management, all
Yeah.
of those different functions are themselves a business.
Oh, yeah.
So each one of them has to be able to collect money, to be able to manage its customer base and all of those things.
Yeah.
But the residents of the cities come and go, and you don't control that, right? People can move into your city and leave your
Yeah.
city, presumably, right? They can take time away. You can have visitors and guests. You can have long-term residents and short-term residents. But there's an expectation that I want to live in a smart city. I want to live in a city where things just work, right? And we see some of this in places like Singapore that are beginning to apply this technology, but there's all kinds of examples in India. There's all kinds
Yeah.
of examples all throughout the world where different organizations are investing in this. And what's really interesting is they see the same challenges as a large enterprise.
Yeah.
How do I break down the silos?
Yeah.
How do I integrate this together? How do I create some master data around who my citizen is, not my
Yeah.
customer necessarily, my citizen or my resident or my tourist,
Yeah.
right? How do I track who they are?
Yeah.
How do I anticipate what their needs are? Can
Hmm.
I predict these things? What should I tell them? What's the next best offer? The marketing kinds of things that you would expect them to do.
Yeah.
And literally, there are hundreds of use cases. We get into IoT, we get into 5G, and it gets even more complicated as soon as we start to say, oh, I want these smart cities to have drones, and I want them to have, air taxis, and the things that we can see coming not 10 or 20 years away, but 5 years away,
Yes,
3 years away, right? The technologies that we're laying right now, like 5G, and we even had some folks out talking about 6G right now before 5G is even rolled out,
yeah.
because you need to anticipate those changes. These are the game-changing foundational technologies that today nobody really is quite sure how they're going to monetize,
Hmm.
but we absolutely know that there will be a huge amount of monetization, whether it's healthcare related or it's traffic management or others. There'll be the significant opportunities there,
Right.
right? But I think, to me, smart cities is kind of one of these places that we can play with a lot of sort of theoretical problem sets. And we're beginning now to see some of our customers start to look at these analytic kind of approaches and
Hmm.
saying, this is not an operational problem. This is an
Yeah.
analytical problem. This is a data problem. This is a data centric issue. And it's eventually going to be situation awareness, disaster
Yeah.
management. You get into all the aspects that you would expect a government to be taking care of,
Right.
right? And those things will lead us to advances that will play back out into the commercial space.
Yeah. Absolutely. You're right. So it's like the infrastructure. If the infrastructure operates better, whoever the companies within that society operate much better. So that's
Right.
really,
So,
really
the pace of change is going. And as we get to these new fundamentals like augmented reality,
yeah.
right? Or, maybe someday a metaverse that's worth bothering to visit, right? I
Yeah.
think we may be a few more years away from that one, but
Possibly.
eventually it's going to come,
Yeah.
right? Because all of a sudden there'll be events that we want to go to, concerts, and
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a dramatic improvement in how we deliver education. There'll be
Yeah.
opportunities for
Oh,
all kinds of entertainment and educational things, that will be able to be possible in a virtual world that aren't possible in a physical world. And as we begin to bridge these worlds together, we're going to see again a whole new set of applications, a whole new set of problems, a whole new set of technologies that we can't really anticipate today, but we can sense that they're coming.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things I like working with the startups, because some of them are actually playing with some of these early adopting versions of what's happening, right, with it.
Excellent. Great. Chris, it is always fun and, learning experience talking to you. So thank you so much for your time. And this has been really a great discussion about some of the challenges that companies face and really what's coming in terms of the newer challenges of data-based decision making. So thank you so much, and appreciate your insights and your guidance about that for our CEOs and CIOs for their database decision making projects. Thank you so much, and appreciate again. Yeah.
As always, Sandeep, I love to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing you again in India in the coming months. Take care.
Yeah, bye bye.